morning, everyone. Before I begin, if you all have your picture books, I wanted to point out a couple of corrections on the NSF staff. At the lower right of page 1, we have Dorothy Jones Davis. I don't know if Dorothy's here yet, but I wanted to point out that she is a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Michigan, and she did a postdoc at UC San Francisco. And from that postdoc position, she came to us at NSF as a AAAS fellow. So I wanted to point that out. And on page 3, we have Lori Stepanek. She is also a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Miami. And just like Dorothy, she did a postdoc at the University of California, San Francisco, and then joined us here at NSF as a AAAS fellow. Okay, so now we'll get started with the panel discussion on diversity. We've been thinking a lot about diversity at the National Science Foundation, and I know that the centers are required to report numbers in their annual reports, and I started asking questions, well, what are we doing with these numbers, and what are these numbers informing us about? And so Dr. Brooke Coley joined us in our division, and I'll tell you her background in just a second, but this is only one of her projects where she's looking at this data, and she has been the one person communicating with you on the SWOT analyses, and I really thank you for the time you spent doing that activity. And I will assure you, to this day, I have never seen the input, and neither has Lynn or anybody else. Brooke is the one that holds all the information from individual inputs. I just want to make sure you understand that. So I showed this slide yesterday, and again, I want to emphasize that we're looking at this matter not as a social justice issue. It's really an economic issue today, and if we're looking at the future competitiveness of the United States, we really need to embrace the populations of this country. And just to quickly point out a couple of statistics, this is a histogram on gender. The leftmost bar is all undergraduate degrees awarded in all disciplines, and as you can see, more women are earning bachelor's degrees than men. But if you look at engineering degrees, it's just under 18% for all engineering disciplines. And if you translate this down to the first bar, then you can extract the information in that only less than 1% of all bachelor's degrees awarded in this country to women are in engineering. Less than 1%. And let's see, what is that? 3.5% of all bachelor's degrees going to men are in engineering. And so that's all races. And then when we look at the faculty situation, we are about 11% on tenure track engineering. And then in the workforce, women engineers comprise about 11% as well. In terms of women and breaking it down a little bit, according to race and ethnicity, this is rather disturbing with white women. Again, this is all BS degrees from the previous slide. And then if you look at BS in engineering, then the 17.9% breaks down accordingly. What's interesting here is that women in the ethnic groups, you know, there's not a lot of change between total BS degrees and engineering degrees, so that's interesting. But this is a disturbing statistic with white women. And so a very small proportion of white women earning bachelor's degrees are getting them in engineering. For men, let's see here. Again, the left side is the all BS degrees awarded. And then looking at the BS degrees going to men by race, what's interesting here is that a larger proportion of white men are earning bachelor's degrees from the total, But again, with the ethnic groups, it's about flat and actually increasing in the different groups. So this is an interesting dynamic. In the previous slide, the white women dives down, and the white men is actually a larger proportion. And then finally, we are all aware that much of our graduate enrollment is international in engineering. And today, we are at approximately 38% U.S. citizens at the graduate level. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brooke Coley. This is her background. She is a Meyerhoff Scholar from UMBC and earned her PhD in bioengineering from University of Pittsburgh. And I'm really proud to have her in our division, and she is going to present to you some interesting information. I've not even seen her slides yet. So Brooke? Oh, and then finally, Brooke, I'm sorry. I wanted to introduce our panelists, and I'll do that again in a minute. We have Diane Matt as the Executive Director of WEPAN is with us. Dr. Amir Miraman, Dean of Engineering and Computing at Florida International, and he is he is part of the new Nano ERC Assist. And Rick Ainsworth from UCLA, and he's part of the new Nano ERC at UCLA. Okay, Brooke.
Okay, good morning. My name is Brooke Coley, and I am a AAAS Fellow working in EEC with Theresa Maldonado and Lynn Preston. And I'm thrilled to be here and be able to give this talk today. This work resonates with me for so many reasons, so I'm really passionate about it. So in the brief time I have, I'm going to give you just an overview of the study that I'm doing on the ERC impact on diversity. Okay, so as we know, or we're learning, that diversity is very important. In addition to the changing demographic in our country, the workforce demands are calling for a diverse population, a diverse set of engineers, a diverse cadre of engineers. As we learned yesterday with that magnificent presentation on creativity, the more input of diversity, the more we get out with diversity. And so if we understand how to better meet the needs of students, we can improve equity and experiences and diversify the workforce in engineering. So the specific purpose of my study is to examine the impact that the ERCs have had largely on women, underrepresented minorities, and persons with disabilities in attempts to create a climate of inclusion that will actively increase retention, productivity, and better the subfields of engineering. There are 4 target outcomes from my study, mainly that we want to enhance diversity and transform the cultures of the institutions that the ERCs are a part of, or that make up the ERCs, I should say. Develop a framework that helps us examine the factors that contribute to student and faculty success, and relate these outcomes, relate the practices to outcomes that we've been observing. And lastly, we want to have a deliverable of a best practices chapter for diversity from the ERCs. So there are some components to the study. We get the ERC demographic data from you all in your annual reports. In addition, in the annual reports, we have the diversity strategic plans, which give us information about what you've done in the previous year, what the challenges were, and how you are planning to rectify that and approach the coming year. We also get updated information at the site visits, the ERC diversity SWOT analysis, which was only possible with your feedback, and the thing that I'm working on next is an ERC diversity climate survey. I think when Lynn Preston and I decided to do this, we had no idea how much that would involve. It's a very tedious process with the Office of Management and Budget, but hopefully in the course of my fellowship, we will be able to get that clearance and develop a diversity climate survey for the ERCs. And that will be an unprecedented activity, which would probably yield tremendous information about the climates in your institutions and ERCs. So as I mentioned, the diversity strategic plans, I've gone through all of the diversity strategic plans. I've read more strategic plans than I probably would ever wanted to. But in that, we learned a lot. And most of the plans are very descriptive programmatically. But what it ends up being is more of a forecast as opposed to a deep, thorough inspection of the mission, how it's to the core, how that is embedded in the activities, how that ties into the classroom, the faculty, the climate, and this is the direction that we want to go. So we want to know what's behind the numbers. We want the ERCs to be thinking in terms of transformation. You all are going to be the change agents, the engines that drive this development of the workforce that we need as we approach the near future. We want to know successes and failures. I want to repeat that. We want to know successes and failures. I don't know if somewhere along the line there was a misconception that NSF only wanted to know the great things that you're doing, but we learn a lot from what has not worked as well. And that's not as readily available in the strategic plans and annual reports. So we're hoping that that can be something that we can include from now on. So we want to address the strategies that make outcomes and impacts possible as opposed to just getting highlights of information. And we want you all to consider models for sustainability, not just of your centers, but of diversity. The diversity that you've worked so hard to create, the averages that you're exceeding, how are those going to continue after the lifespan of NSF funding for your center? So here I have a little slide with the ERC trajectory. And if you imagine to, let's see how you're oriented, I guess to your right, my left, is the starting point and approaching the finish line. So we have the class of 2003 approaching the finish line, class of 2006, class of 2008, class of 2011, and don't worry, newbies, I did not forget you, class of 2012. And so if you look, some of the centers are italicized and underlined. That indicates that those centers actually have a position specified for diversity. A diversity director, someone that has a joint position but focuses primarily on diversity explicitly. And the colors are just the type of center. So orange is biotech, purple is microelectronics, green manufacturing, and white energy. And so the purpose for this slide might say, we've seen this already, I know, but how this relates to the diversity strategic plans is depending on what side of the coin you're on, be it Gen 2, Gen 3. Okay, I'm not going to go into this. This is information extracted from the programmatic terms and conditions. But what I do want to focus on is the fact that if you were in Gen 2, you were told that in your diversity strategic plan, you wanted to highlight key deficiencies, identify it in the previous year's plan, and new strategies to rectify them. We haven't been seeing this. And if you were in Gen 3, it's different altogether, because you have the addition of the focus on global development and focusing on foreign partnerships. So these plans shall articulate the ERC's diversity goals and intended actions, but need not specify quantitative targets. The ERC will also be multicultural, and it goes on. But the point for that is, part of it may be on us. Maybe we're sending mixed messages, and we have different centers reporting different things from different time points. So in the future, if we can work towards restructuring our diversity strategic plans to think more systematically, if we think, for example, if your perspective that you want to work on is access, then your goal might be, how do we achieve a more diverse and inclusive graduate student body? So your objective would then be, possibly, to increase the academic success of diverse and underrepresented students. How would you do that? And then you share the strategy. Perhaps you would identify specific barriers to this academic progress. And then once you do all this, how do you measure it? Well, you could look at the first to second year retention rates by race and gender. So that's just an example. And we're hoping that as time progresses, the diversity strategic plans will be more informative, more of a blueprint, more that we can look at and gather information to know in greater detail what is going on in terms of diversity within the centers. So it wouldn't be me if I didn't give you some data. I just want to quickly show you some of the current ERC data. And I have a point that we're going to look at on each slide. So in the women in the ERCs, faculty for females has increased. But as I've been learning through the SWOT analysis, the perception is that this is largely due to the fact that women in education and outreach excuse me, have increased. So women on the leadership teams have increased. There's a slide that I have later that shows that women in faculty, not on the leadership team, that it's pretty flat. So in terms of Hispanics, the ERCs have done a great job in increasing the number of doctoral students, Hispanic students. And you can look to see from 2000 to 2012, I know you can't see the numbers, but it's a significant growth in the number of Hispanic students in the ERC, so that's definitely something that you're doing well. In terms of the underrepresented minorities in the ERCs, the growth has been in the undergraduate population. So both the, oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry, sure. Let me go back here. The red dots are the ASEE national averages. So as you can see, you all skyrocket above those in all areas and pretty consistently. The ASE national averages are within the respective personnel groups have been pretty consistent. And we've had some fluctuation, but like I said, I'm highlighting the areas of most significant growth with regard to the different demographic groups. Uh-oh, uh-oh. I'm sorry. Yes. 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 So this slide actually lumps leadership and faculty together, which is from, okay, all right. So I have a slide where I can show you the separated, the disaggregated groups, but, okay. So the diversity SWOT analysis is what I wanted to spend the most amount of time on because that's where your participation came in. And I wanted to first start off and say, I really thank you for your feedback. You all gave very candid responses that enabled us to, well, enabled me because this will be the first time that anybody else sees what you all said. But it's been very informative and it will help me to create the questions that will serve as the climate survey outline or backbone. So how can we do better? That was the main purpose of the diversity SWOT analyses. As Dr. Seelig said yesterday, we wanted to know what that background music that's going on in your centers. We want to know that. We don't get that through the reporting mechanisms that I've shared. So the goal was to look across ERCs, to look at the institutions that make up your ERCs, and at the different personnel groups, from center directors to students. So this did not include our newest centers, of course. This was just the 17 active centers from 2003 to 2011. So let's see, I'm going to just start off with some of the strengths. And, okay, 7 minutes. Okay, so I'll try to rocket through these. The center's research focus generates high interest among diverse populations. Leveraging programs across parent and partner institutions. These are things that centers are doing well. And I should say that anything that's included here had a frequency of 4. So amongst the different personnel groups, if 4 centers reported this one comment and some, the wording was different, but the main concept, if it was this, then if 4 or more different centers, then it's here. Okay, so there are things that you said that either were too identifying or didn't have that frequency. That will be discussed in the diversity closed session, because there are still some really pertinent things that were addressed that I think should be addressed. But just for the sake here, we wanted to present what's common and most frequent. So instituting mechanisms to fund women and minority graduate students. Creates a range of job types from industry to research for ERC graduates. The representation of Hispanics in leadership has increased. Successfully graduated master's and PhD female and underrepresented minorities with center support. More strengths. Industry's diverse initiatives for research and collaboration have benefited from ERC relationship. The university provides several fellowship opportunities for the support of URMs with the specific goal to advance excellence through diversity. Social activities fostered to engage students and welcome new students to the center. Current ERC staff composition include individuals with the knowledge, experience, and relationships needed to effectively address diversity and equity concerns within the scope of the ERC mission. Regular inclusive team meetings, and I want to highlight that because that came up so many times, but I think the difference is the word inclusive. There were weaknesses addressed that showed that some centers are not including all personnel. Specifically, the education and outreach was not included in leadership meetings, so I believe that perhaps this is capturing an inclusive meeting for the progression of the center. And I just wanted to show here, this was the increase in Hispanic personnel, but for sake of time, I'll skip that. Weaknesses. Lack of faculty diversity amongst parent institutions. As recruiting is not as glamorous as other efforts, it takes a backseat to other efforts. ERC has limited resources with competing priorities. More resources are needed to encourage center diversity goals. An evident need for growth in sensitivity and awareness on all fronts pertinent to diversity. In spite of significant focused efforts, the percentage of underrepresented graduate students has remained low. This was a high point of frustration. People have really exhausted several different mechanisms, but despite those efforts, there's no change in the numbers. And hopefully we can address that in the diversity closed session today. There's intense competition from other institutions for minority students. And I'll take that one step farther. It was actually stated that within an institution, if the ERCs increase their numbers, then they feel they will be taking minority students from other programs. And as universities strive to reduce their funding deficiencies, support for diversity programs have been severely reduced. More weaknesses. Industry members are not used effectively. There's diversity almost to the point of non-diversity. The program seems to be dominated by students from China and India. Difficult to encourage faculty at partner universities to improve diversity. The visibility and impact of our ERC at the HBCU campuses is not evident. Lack of cross-campus information flow and opportunities to visit other member universities for understanding the various areas of research being conducted under the center. Faculty dedicated to diversity are lacking. Having dedicated staff is necessary for a strong diversity effort, but not sufficient. Diversity and outreach should be considered as a core value to an ERC. Lack of focus on diversity and outreach at all levels of an ERC. So, moving to the threats, and I'm just, if you bear with me for a second, I want to take this out of order because I want to leave on the opportunities. I want to leave with where we can go, what options lie ahead for us. ERCs rely on yield of pre-college outreach, which will have less direct impact on the center due to their graduation within the 10-year period. The geographical locations haven't been targeted or attractive for targeting minorities. A lack of diversity perpetuates a lack of diversity. It's hard to get diversity where people don't see people like themselves. There's a lack of strong commitment by university departments. One thing I'll point out, this was largely reported from the leadership, and they said that our administrators just don't get it. Success of other ERCs in the area of inclusive excellence could lead to the attraction of URMs to those centers. So when students come out from undergrad, they have a degree in mechanical engineering, they could go to several centers. So if there's a center that's doing well for diversity, perhaps it'll be easier for that student to go where they fit or feel welcome or have the diversity present, as opposed to taking on the task of being a trailblazer. Diversity is looked at as a checkbox and falls under education and outreach goals, rather than a strategic element of the center. And the problem of low graduation rates should be given high priority and is overshadowed by other things. Diversity would not continue to be of importance if NSF did not require it. The assumption that a good researcher also makes a natural mentor and teacher. Failure to cast a wide net for diverse students by limiting it to GPA as the main requirement for selection. Center cliques form where foreign language speakers switch to their native tongue, and consequently, many of the students feel alienated that can't jump into that conversation. I want to say that amongst the frequency of things, you would be surprised how many times this was stated. So if I had ranked these, that would probably be in the top 3. The typical laboratory is not easily adaptable, so more resources need to be allocated to make labs readily available to accept and attract persons with disabilities. And most female leaders in the center are involved in education and outreach. The same is true with other minorities. For the sake of time, I'll skip them and just say, I firmly believe that insanity is when we do the same thing over and over, even though we don't get different results. So if we think about the opportunities, these are the opportunities that you all presented. And there are more, but this is just to, these are just the highest frequency comments made. So if there was a program tuning, someone suggested, or a few people suggested, tuning your programs annually. Think about what works, think about what doesn't, and scratch them. Develop transition programs for students into the center, 1 year at a community college, and then they can transfer into the center. Provide certification, advancement, or continuing education that further develops a workforce. Follow international requirements and mainstream the diversity beyond the education and outreach. Seek a more diverse postdoc population. At national conferences or conferences in your subfields of engineering, host gatherings for women and minorities to engage potential interest in your center and related research. NSF should require diversity training workshops and/or courses for all ERC faculty and staff. Enter ERC partnerships and alliances for joint recruiting of URMs could affect a culture change and influence in reaching diverse students. And several centers have started doing this by their recruitment efforts at national meetings. Better integrate center-related research into the undergrad curriculum, and this would attract more domestic students into graduate school. And increase face-to-face interaction of diversity personnel in engineering across the ERC campuses so that the people working on these efforts could get together and build relationships. And with that, I'll stop, and hopefully we can expand on this in the diversity closed session. Thank you.